In this episode, I clean the world's filthiest boot carpet. I change my point of view to get a different perspective on things. I make use of a hammer for hammering things, and do a non-technical technical drawing. So before bolting in the fuel cell, I'll need to put the carpet in. Before I put the carpet in, this will need to be cleaned off, and then I'll need to wash it. And I hate to think what colour is actually going to come out of that. For some reason, I intend to save it and show you. It's disgusting and it stinks. So obviously we want to eliminate that. Scrubber, carpet cleaner, bucket of water, pretend there's water in here, wet it down and go to town. About that much. I do have this vacuum set up for wet vacuum. This cheap nozzle I got from eBay. It's currently empty and clean. I'll get a container to pour the results into after I'm done. Just going to leave that to soak for a while, re-scrub it, and then I'll vacuum up what I can. Rinse, vacuum, scrub, rinse, vacuum. We'll get there eventually. I'll try and rinse out some with the bucket, but I'm going to miss out on capturing some of the filth because I'm going to have to take this away and hose it out. Alright, so it's all rinsed. I'm just going to vac out as much water as I can and then leave it to dry. Well, I don't have a clear container on hand, but maybe you can see, like, from this, that's just out of that rear carpet. Gross. Well, while I wait for that carpet to dry, I'm going to also build a couple of cross braces to extend past this lip to help secure the fuel cell in more locations, spread the load a bit. It might be overkill, but I feel a bit better about having extra bracing for the cell to try and lock it in place. The original tank was bolted in via all these holes around the perimeter. The cell's only held in by 4, so by putting some bracing here will help tie all that in back to these again and give back the strength of holding the tank in place. In order to make the holes for the mounting points for the fuel cell, I'm going to use a soldering iron to go through the carpet. I learnt that trick from Vice Grip Garage. I've never done it before. It seems to work for him, so hopefully it'll work for me too. It's a matter of locating where the hole is, somehow. A matter of locating the hole, and pushing the soldering iron in, and that will self-seal the carpet. Make a nice hole in the carpet, which is done, and hopefully not ruin my soldering iron. That soldering iron trick made a perfectly nice hole in the carpet with sealed edges. Excellent. Okay, so off camera I did a bit of test fitting with the tank and the carpet in place. Everything's looking pretty good. So it's time to pull the plate out, lay down a bead of sealant, and then bolt this in and set it in place. Floor plates in, fitted, bolted down, sealant applied, carpets in, tanks bolted in on top, everything's all nice and secure. One last check. That's not going anywhere. Well, now that the tank's in, I can start running some fuel lines. I need to mount the fuel pump in this location so I can get the length of hose correct. I've cut out some pieces of rubber here, which I'm going to use a hole punch to knock some holes in for the bolts to go through. That will isolate the pump from the frame and stop noise and vibration transferring through to the cabin. Well, before I get to running lines, installing the fuel pump, under there probably needs a bit of a rebuild, rattle can rebuild. Let's get onto that first. Well, now I've started, I may as well keep going and do the whole thing, I guess. It's actually really good under there. All the primer's still in place. There's a bit of black paint flaked off under there, but there's no rust coming through, so now it's recoated and sealed. I'm going to give the wheel wells another coat just because they're high impact area for debris. And then I'll jack up the front of the car, complete the rest, and that will be the underbody rebuild finished. Underbody rebuild complete. All right, back on task. The underbody is all dry now, so it's back to fitting the fuel lines to the fuel cell. I've already got the line fed through the boot floor, through the grommet here. Let's fit up a hose clamp, get this onto the line, and then fit the feed line on. Okay, now I know I said that was a return line, but in this case, the electric pump will deadhead against the carb, so this is actually just going to be a tank vapor line or relief line for pressure. Back on top side, now to hook up the line to the tank. I set a loop in there to catch vapor, stop any actual fluid getting through, and I went and bought myself a hose cutter because I've been doing it with a Stanley knife for many years, and I finally decided having straight cut edges on hoses might be nice. Alright, loop created. I'm going to go about here. Oh, that's nice. Onto the feed line. Alright, fit the feed line onto the tank. Search for tools with your boots. Find the tools with your boots. Fuel pump will mount sort of here. Run that line to there. That won't need a bracket to support it, but I will need to go get the fuel pump. Alright, so get the fuel pump out the box, fit the filter that comes with it, and start mounting it to the car. No thread tape required for the fittings. Specifically says not to use it. Filter on the inlet side of the pump, 24mm, tighten that up. Got the 2 gaskets I made just for extra thickness because this stuff wasn't very thick. And 1 bolt to fit the chassis. The other side will need tech screw. Okay, that's not going to work. I need it more secure than that. Okay, change of plan. So I ran out of light, but I'm back. The fuel pump's now fitted, fuel lines attached, running to
the hard line, which heads out to the front of the car. The vapour line's also attached, so everything back here is done, except for wiring connections, which I'll need to work on shortly, but I would like to get the engine bay line run to the carb and add the filter.
Alright, so fuel line onto the hard line. Good engagement, do that up. Giving myself the smallest amount of room to work in, as usual. Oh, I'm guessing there's normally a bracket here for the fuel filter to mount to. Also, get rid of the barcode, make a mess of it, make it look horrible. Why do these things never come off properly? Why do they have to leave paper and glue residue? God. Alright, back again. Look, if you're running a company that uses those paper barcodes on stuff that leaves the residue behind, I just want you to know that I don't like you. Who's going to try and tamper with a barcode off a $3 fuel filter, really? Going to go about here, just because. No, I'm going to go there. Check the flow direction of the filter, that way. My most favourite new tool. Look, I know they're only scissors for hoses, but it's one of those things where I kind of wish I bought one sooner. Alright, now just got to find some fuel and do a quick nasty wiring job on that pump to get it to run, to see if I actually have the hoses hooked up the correct way. I hope so. Bit of the best stale fuel I have lying around. This will probably leak everywhere. Just like that. Perfect. Time for a rag. Whoop. Look, that was completely intentional because you need old cars to smell like fuel, otherwise you don't really know you're driving an old car. I'm just going to try and rig up the jump pack to the pump to get it to run. Then I'll head up the front to see if the fuel actually gets to the carb. Oh, pump's running. It's definitely in the filter. Let's put the key on. It's going to help if it's got spark, you know? Alright, so I've done a quick wiring job here to try and get the fuel sender to work. The issue is, this is a GM style sender and the TA22 gauge work in reverse. So the ohm reading for the gauge is wanting to read empty when the tank's full and wants to read full when the tank's empty. Run this earth. Okay, so the tank's pretty empty at the moment, but the gauge is moving up past halfway. I now grab the sender and lift it. Now the gauge drops. So that isn't going to work. I have a fuel sender translator thing that I hope, when programmed, will invert the signals so that full will read full and empty will read empty. Let me explain. Okay, put the sender here and the gauge here. Full and empty, full and empty. Now I believe when the gauge is full, it wants to be 3 ohms. Empty is 110. But I think the sender wants to be 90 when full and 0 when empty. So what's happening is when the sender's sitting all the way down the bottom at empty, it's at the low value, so the gauge wants to read high. When it's held up full, it's got the high reading, where the gauge wants to see the high reading and is reading empty. No good. So with the fuel tank interface, I'm hoping to be able to program it so that the empty reading and full reading get inverted through this, which will switch the signals around. Empty becomes empty after being translated. Full becomes full after being translated. The gauge will read what the sender's telling it because of this little box, I hope. So the fuel pump's all wired up. The fuel translator for the sender is also wired up. Now I have to program the sensor position so it tells the gauge what I need it to see. In order to do that, I need to hold down the full mark button on the controller and then access the power by switching the car on. Release the button, have a red light which is ready to program. It needs to be programmed from full to empty. I'll need to fish around in the tank with this, pull the float up, wait for the gauge to level out and then start adjusting. So now that is adjusted up to the full mark, so we hit the full button to save. Then I need to guess where half a tank is. I'm going to go about there. Wait for the gauge to adjust again. Set it with the calibration screw once the gauge has moved and save to the halfway mark on the controller. It's probably going to go way past it, would have overshot it, I'd say. So after a bit of mucking around, I finally got to the point where it should be at the halfway mark. So we go to the half mark program button, save that, and then I can let the float sit on the bottom, wait for the gauge to settle, and program the empty mark. Finally, at the empty mark, hit the empty mark button. That's saved. Now all we got to do is power off and it should save to the unit. And the last step is to set the needle where the gauge will sit when the car is powered on. I want it to sit at the empty mark, so what I'm going to do is press and hold the empty switch, power on, and release. That should be it. Well, that little ohm range converter device has been well worth the money. It was about $40, I think, on eBay. You'll probably find them on Amazon as well. It means I'm able to retain the factory gauge even though the sender is sending out a different signal than the gauge wants to see. You could use it if you needed to replace a fuel gauge in a vehicle and your original sender's working. It's adjustable and calibratable. It's easy to set. If something goes wrong and the range goes a bit funky later, I can always go back in and adjust it to suit the gauge again, or possibly measured the half tank mark wrong this time round. Doesn't bother me for now. It was going to be hard to find a sender to suit the gauge that would fit in the tank. This is a lot easier and cheaper and with a lot less hassle, so well worth the investment in my opinion. Well, that's about enough for this episode. I'm just going to put the cover on that translator, hide all the wiring, find a nice home for that to live in so it doesn't get knocked around, and close the boot and not think about anything in here for a while. Move on to something else. See you in the next one.